It was a quiet, rainy afternoon when the sound of a faint crack echoed through the small apartment. On the desk sat a device that had been a constant companion for years, one that was relied upon daily for work, communication, and entertainment. It wasn't the newest or the most expensive, but it had proven dependable until now. The problem started subtly. A small flicker on the screen, a strange delay when pressing buttons, a faint smell of overheated plastic. At first, these signs were ignored, brushed off as temporary glitches. But over the next few days, the malfunctions became more frequent. The screen would freeze mid-task, important files would take ages to load, and sometimes the device wouldn't even turn on without several attempts. On that particular afternoon, while rushing to meet an important deadline, the device stopped working entirely. The timing could not have been worse. No matter how many times the power button was pressed, there was nothing but silence and a dark screen staring back. It was as if the device had given up completely. Frustration built quickly. The thought of replacing it was daunting. Not only was money tight, but there was also a deep sense of attachment to this piece of technology. It held memories, projects, and years of personal history. Throwing it away felt almost like discarding a part of life itself. The owner sat back, staring at the lifeless object. At that moment, most people would have sighed, pushed it aside, and looked for a replacement online. But here, something different happened. Instead of accepting the loss, there was an urge to understand why it had failed. Not out of professional expertise, in fact, there was no formal background in electronics, but out of pure curiosity and determination. A small toolkit kept in a drawer for fixing household items was pulled out. With a deep breath, the first screws were removed. The casing came apart with a slight pop, revealing the complex world hidden inside, a network of circuits, wires, chips, and components, all arranged in precise order. It was the first time this internal view had been seen, and it felt almost like peeking into a secret world. What caught the eye immediately was a small, discolored section near one of the primary connections. It looked as though heat had built up over time, causing the material to degrade. This could have been the reason for the failure. Without realizing it, this simple observation planted the first seed of a much larger idea. The rain outside continued to fall, tapping softly against the window. But inside the apartment there was a different rhythm now. The careful turning of screws, the gentle lifting of parts, and the slow process of tracing each connection. The more the device was examined, the clearer it became that this was not magic or mystery. It was a puzzle, one that could be solved with patience and the right approach. The decision was made. The device would not be discarded. Instead, it would be repaired. This choice was not just about saving money. It was about refusing to accept that something broken had to stay broken. It was about testing what could be done with limited resources and an open mind. Hours passed in quiet focus. There were moments of trial and error, moments where it seemed hopeless, and moments where progress sparked a surge of motivation. Eventually, after replacing a small component with a makeshift part taken from another unused gadget, the device showed signs of life again. The screen flickered, the familiar startup sound played, and a wave of satisfaction filled the room. In that moment, the repair seemed like a simple victory. But it was more than that. Hidden within this small success was a realization. If one person with no formal training could take something broken and make it work again, even improve it, then there were endless possibilities waiting to be explored. It was a thought that lingered long after the device was closed back up and placed on the desk again. The rain stopped, the sky cleared, and outside the world went on as usual. Inside, however, something had changed. A new way of looking at technology had begun to take shape, one that would soon lead to far greater things than a single fixed device. The weeks turned into months, and what began as a series of late-night experiments started to feel like something far more serious. The little corner of the apartment, once overflowing with tools and scattered parts, now resembled a miniature production workshop. The desk was covered in labeled containers filled with screws, wires, microchips, and tiny components salvaged from discarded devices. Shelves groaned under the weight of half-repaired gadgets, while a soldering station sat permanently in the center of it all, ready for the next project. The difference now was intention. At first, repairs were simply a way to challenge oneself, a puzzle to solve. But somewhere along the way, the repairs became prototypes, and the prototypes began to feel like the seeds of actual products. The thought kept returning. If this can be made better, why not share it? Every day after work, the routine was the same. A quick meal, then hours spent hunched over the desk, experimenting. Sometimes it was a complete failure, a wire burning out, a circuit refusing to power up, or an idea that just didn't work in practice. Other times, there were breakthroughs. A dead battery pack was replaced with a longer-lasting rechargeable cell. A slow processor was swapped for one that ran twice as fast. Each small success made the hours of trial and error worth it. The internet became an ally. Forums dedicated to hardware modification, open-source projects, and maker communities became a second home. Questions were asked, answers were given, and every conversation sparked new possibilities. People from around the world shared the same passion, transforming what already existed into something better. It was during one of these late-night browsing sessions that the turning point arrived. A post on a small forum discussed a specific device that had been discontinued years ago. Users loved it, but the manufacturer had stopped producing replacement parts, leaving thousands of owners with broken, unusable units. Someone commented, "If only someone could rebuild this with modern parts, it would sell instantly." The words lit a fire. That night, the old flea market box was dug through until one of those exact discontinued devices was found. It was in terrible shape, scratched casing, missing buttons, damaged circuitry, but the core of it still functioned. The challenge was clear: rebuild it, upgrade it, and make it better than the original. Weeks were spent on that single project. Replacement parts had to be sourced from obscure suppliers. Certain components had to be reverse-engineered entirely, using diagrams found in old repair manuals. There were moments of near defeat when nothing seemed to work, but then came the breakthroughs. The screen lit up with a clearer, brighter display. The software ran smoother. The battery lasted 3 times longer than before. When it was finally complete, it didn't just work. It felt like a new device. Holding it in hand, the realization set in. This could be something others would want. The concept of sharing the creation moved from a vague thought to an actual plan. The first step was to post about it online. Photos were taken, specifications listed, and a short explanation was written detailing the upgrades. Within hours, the post gained attention. Comments poured in. Some were simply impressed, others wanted to know if they could buy one. Private messages started arriving with offers. This was no longer just a personal passion project. There was a market for these ideas, and it was bigger than imagined. The possibility of turning this into something sustainable, maybe even a business, was no longer far-fetched. But with excitement came caution. Questions surfaced. How could something like this be scaled? Would manufacturers take notice and try to shut it down? Could this be done legally and ethically while still pushing the boundaries of innovation? These were big concerns, but they didn't overshadow the sense of momentum. The shift from curiosity to commitment had happened quietly, almost without realizing it. This wasn't just about repairing devices anymore. It was about solving problems, filling gaps left by companies, and showing that innovation could come from a single person with determination and vision. The apartment workshop now had a new atmosphere. Every tool, every spare part, every notebook felt like part of something that might one day be much larger. The path forward wasn't fully clear, but the direction was undeniable. The next steps would require more than just skill with a soldering iron. They would demand planning, resourcefulness, and the courage to take an idea out of the safety of a small workspace and into the world. The first spark had come from a broken device, but now the fire was spreading, and there was no going back. In the days after the repair, life returned to its normal rhythm. The device worked again, files opened without delay, and the stress of an unexpected expense had been avoided. But in the back of the mind, something kept stirring. The experience of taking apart a piece of technology and restoring it had been more than just a problem solved. It had awakened a curiosity that refused to fade. At first, it was subtle. Moments of reflection while making coffee or while walking to the store when the thought would return. What else could be fixed? This question seemed simple, but it began to grow roots. It wasn't just about repairs anymore. The memory of that discolored section on the circuit board sparked a deeper thought. If this design flaw had been avoided, maybe the device wouldn't have failed in the first place. That single observation shifted the focus. Instead of viewing technology as something to be used until it broke, the perspective began to change toward understanding how it could be improved from the start. It was like discovering that behind every object in daily life was a story of design choices, trade-offs, and overlooked possibilities. Soon, research became a nightly habit. Online articles, old technical manuals, and open forums filled with hobbyists and engineers became a source of learning. The terminology, once foreign, began to make sense. Capacitors, resistors, integrated circuits, the building blocks of modern devices were no longer mysterious. And with each new piece of knowledge, the urge to experiment grew stronger. The small apartment gradually transformed. What had once been a tidy corner desk now became a workspace cluttered with wires, tools, old electronics picked up at thrift stores, and notebooks full of sketches. Friends would visit and raise an eyebrow at the mess, but to the one working there, it was a laboratory, a place where ideas were tested and failures were just part of the process. Then came the moment that would shape everything. While browsing a local flea market, a box of discarded gadgets caught the eye. Inside were items in various states of disrepair: cracked screens, missing buttons, worn-out batteries. The seller offered the entire box for the price of a single cup of coffee. It was too tempting to resist. That night, the floor of the apartment was covered with the contents of that box. Some items were beyond saving, but others had simple problems. Loose connections, worn-out switches, corroded contacts. Fixing them wasn't just satisfying, it became a challenge to make them better than they had been before. A repaired speaker was given a more efficient amplifier. A digital camera received an upgrade to store twice as many photos. Every successful project fueled the belief that there was untapped potential in what most people considered trash. But the real breakthrough came with one particular device. A small, outdated gadget with limited functionality. The thought occurred, what if it could be modified to do something entirely different? Not just restored, but reimagined. This question became an obsession over the next few weeks. Schematics were drawn, components were swapped, and the device began to take on a new form. By the end of the process, it wasn't just repaired, it was something unique, something that didn't exist on store shelves. That creation wasn't perfect, but it represented a new step, the shift from fixing to inventing. This was no longer about avoiding the cost of replacement, it was about creating value from what others overlooked. It was a mindset change, and it carried a quiet but powerful realization that innovation did not require starting from scratch or massive funding. Sometimes it just required looking at what already existed and asking the right questions. The idea that wouldn't go away had now become a mission. Late nights turned into early mornings, and the apartment, once just a home, had become the birthplace of experiments that blurred the line between hobby and purpose. There was still no clear plan for where this would lead, but the path forward seemed unavoidable. Each new project added confidence. Each small success pushed the boundaries of what felt possible. What began as a single broken device had become the seed of something much larger, and the realization was growing clearer with each passing day. This might just be the start of something that could change more than one person's life. It could change the way the world thought about technology altogether. The online post was never meant to be a marketing campaign. It was simply an update shared with a small group of enthusiasts. But the internet has a way of carrying ideas far beyond their intended audience. Within days, the photos and description of the rebuilt device were shared on larger forums, tech blogs, and social media pages dedicated to innovation. At first, it was surreal. A project born on a cluttered workbench in a modest apartment was suddenly being discussed by people halfway across the globe. There were debates about the quality of the modifications, threads speculating on the methods used, and even a few professionals in the electronics industry expressing curiosity. Then came the messages that changed everything. They weren't from casual enthusiasts. They were from people who wanted to order in bulk, small business owners who ran repair shops, independent gadget sellers looking for exclusive products. Even one overseas distributor reached out, asking about pricing for hundreds of units. The problem was obvious. There was no production process. This wasn't a product line, it was a one-off creation. Each piece required hours of manual work, sourcing rare parts and troubleshooting unique issues. Scaling this would require a complete shift in approach. That's when the research phase began. Nights were no longer spent only soldering and testing. They were now filled with reading about supply chains, manufacturing options, and small-scale production techniques. The dream of turning the idea into a business suddenly had a foundation, but also a list of challenges. The first challenge was sourcing. The original parts for the discontinued device were scarce, and relying on scavenged units from flea markets wouldn't work for large orders. The solution was to design replacements from scratch. This meant working with suppliers who could produce components in small batches. Finding these suppliers was no small task. Many refused orders under a certain volume, and others quoted prices that would erase any potential profit. The second challenge was time. Each device took days to build by hand, and balancing this with a full-time job was impossible. The thought of leaving the job was tempting, but risky. There was no guarantee that the orders would keep coming once production started. Despite the obstacles, progress was made. A small partnership was formed with a local machine shop to create custom casings. A contact from an online forum helped source compatible microchips at a reasonable price. Slowly, the pieces of a supply chain began to form. Meanwhile, the attention online only grew. A mid-sized tech blog published an article about the independent creator bringing back a lost gadget, which drove a flood of new messages. Some were from customers, others from journalists, and a few from people offering unsolicited business advice. The attention was exciting, but also overwhelming. For the first time, the inbox felt like a responsibility, not just a place for casual conversation. A pivotal moment came when a well-known YouTube tech reviewer reached out. His channel had millions of subscribers, and he wanted to feature the device in a video. The request was both thrilling and terrifying. On one hand, the exposure could transform the project overnight. On the other, a negative review could bury it just as quickly. The decision was made to send the reviewer a unit, one built with meticulous care. Every component was double-checked, every seam aligned perfectly. The package was shipped, and the wait began. Days felt like weeks until the video went live. The review was overwhelmingly positive. The host praised the quality, the attention to detail, and the fact that an individual, not a corporation, had revived something beloved by so many. The video racked up millions of views in a matter of days, and with it came an avalanche of orders. The flood of attention brought both opportunity and chaos. Orders piled up faster than they could be fulfilled. Emails went unanswered for days simply because there weren't enough hours to respond to them all. There was no automated system, no team, and no warehouse. It was one person in a small apartment trying to keep up with a wave that showed no signs of slowing down. The realization was unavoidable. This was no longer a hobby. The project had crossed into something much bigger, and the next step would require stepping fully into the unknown. Scaling up wasn't optional anymore. It was the only way forward. The transition from a single workbench to a functioning startup wasn't something that happened overnight. It began with a single decision to rent a small workspace. It wasn't glamorous. The floors were bare concrete, the walls were unpainted, and the lighting was dim. But it offered something invaluable: space to breathe. No longer would parts be stored in boxes under a bed or completed units stacked precariously in the kitchen. The first task was to organize the operation. A large wooden table was purchased second-hand and became the main assembly area. Shelves were installed for storing components. A corner of the room was dedicated to testing equipment, with tools neatly arranged for quick access. It was far from the sleek image of a modern tech lab, but it was functional, and it felt like progress. With the space set up, the next challenge was labor. The flood of orders after the YouTube review made it clear that one person could not handle production alone. 2 part-time helpers were hired, friends who had a basic understanding of electronics and were willing to learn. Training them took time. The work required precision, and even the smallest error could ruin a unit. But within weeks, they were building with consistency. As production increased, so did the logistical complexity. There were suppliers to coordinate with, shipments to track, invoices to manage, and customers to update. This was when the value of systems became clear. Spreadsheets evolved into inventory software. Email folders were organized into categories for orders, customer service, and press inquiries. Every improvement shaved minutes off the workday, which added up quickly. The first true business risk came when an overseas supplier offered a deal on a bulk order of components. It was a discount that could dramatically improve profit margins, but it required an upfront payment that would drain almost all available funds. The decision was agonizing. If the supplier failed to deliver, or if the quality was poor, the business could collapse before it truly began. After several days of debate, the leap was taken. Weeks later, the shipment arrived, and the components were flawless. That single gamble increased production speed and profitability. Marketing, up to this point, had been entirely organic. People found the product through word of mouth, social media, and tech blogs. But with growing competition from copycats, some selling low-quality imitations, there was a need to control the narrative. A simple website was built, featuring clear photos, product details, and a story about how the invention came to life. It gave customers a place to go for accurate information, and it added credibility to the brand. However, scaling also meant facing new problems. With larger orders came more opportunities for things to go wrong. A batch of devices once arrived at a customer S shop with a defect caused by a supplier S faulty part. The cost of replacing them was painful, both financially and in terms of reputation. It was a hard lesson. Quality control could never be an afterthought. In the midst of this, another breakthrough came. A small regional electronics retailer expressed interest in carrying the product in their stores. It was the first step into brick-and-mortar sales, and while the initial order was modest, it opened the door to a completely different market. To fulfill it, production had to run at full capacity for nearly 2 weeks. The long hours were exhausting, but seeing the device on a store shelf for the first time was a moment of validation unlike any before. The shift from workshop to startup also brought a change in mindset. This was no longer just about building something unique. It was about building something sustainable. That meant thinking months ahead instead of days, planning for growth instead of reacting to it, and understanding that every decision could affect the survival of the business. Still, the passion that started it all never faded. Even with employees, suppliers, and a growing customer base, there were nights when the founder would stay late, working on the bench just like in the early days. The satisfaction of seeing an idea take shape in their own hands remained the heartbeat of the venture. The stage was set for the next big leap. moving beyond a niche product for enthusiasts and into the broader consumer market. But with greater reach would come greater challenges, including legal hurdles, competition from established brands, and the constant risk of innovation being overtaken by the next big thing. For now, though, the small team had accomplished something remarkable, turning a single broken device into a functioning company. The foundation was laid, the systems were in place, and the dream had evolved into a business with real momentum. The early months of growth had been exhilarating. Orders were steady, new partnerships were forming, and the team was beginning to believe the invention could compete in the larger market. But success attracts attention, not all of it welcome. One morning, an envelope arrived bearing the logo of a major international law firm. Inside was a formal letter, several pages long, written in precise and intimidating language. The letter claimed that the device violated the intellectual property rights of a major tech corporation. It demanded that production and sales stop immediately, threatening legal action if these demands were not met. It was the kind of letter that could crush a small company overnight. The founder read it several times, trying to process the situation. The accusations seemed vague, but the threat was clear. A corporation with resources far beyond anything they could match was now watching them. Fear set in. Could they be forced to shut down? Was all the work, all the late nights, all the risk taken so far about to be undone? The first step was to seek advice. A local attorney specializing in small business law was hired to review the claim. After several tense days, the lawyer concluded that the accusations were not as strong as they appeared. The corporation had a patent for a technology vaguely similar to the invention, but it was not identical. This was not an open and shut case. Still, the risk of a drawn-out legal battle was real. The company had two options: comply with the demands and rework the product, or stand firm and prepare for a fight. The second option carried significant financial danger, but the first would mean halting momentum and possibly losing the core features that made the device special. After several late-night discussions with the team, a middle path was chosen. They would make small adjustments to the design, improving certain features while carefully avoiding any possible overlap with the corporation's patents. At the same time, the lawyer sent a detailed response, firmly stating that the current version did not infringe on any rights and that the company intended to continue operations. This period was tense. Every day felt uncertain. Would another letter arrive? Would a court summons be next? While waiting, the team focused on making the product even better. The redesign led to faster assembly, increased durability, and a few new features customers loved. Ironically, what began as a legal threat became the push that elevated the device to a new level. Behind the scenes, the founder also began learning about intellectual property law. It was a crash course in patents, trademarks, and licensing. This knowledge, though acquired under pressure, became a powerful tool. The company filed its own patent application, ensuring that its unique innovations were protected. Weeks passed with no further contact from the corporation. The silence was nerve-wracking, but also a sign that perhaps the strategy had worked. Sales continued, customers remained loyal, and the team's confidence grew. The legal storm, for now, had passed, but the experience left a lasting impression. It was a reminder that in the world of technology, innovation does not exist in isolation. Every success story unfolds in a competitive landscape where others may try to claim ownership, restrict your progress, or use their size to intimidate. The lesson was clear. Creativity alone was not enough. Survival required preparation, protection, and resilience. By the end of the year, the company was not just back on track. It was stronger than before. The redesigned product was receiving glowing reviews, the legal groundwork was in place, and the team had learned to navigate one of the most dangerous aspects of running a business. Yet, there was no illusion that the road ahead would be free of obstacles. If anything, the founder now understood that each new level of success would invite a new level of challenge. The legal battle had been the first major test, but it would not be the last. With the legal scare behind them, the company began to dream bigger. Up until now, all sales had been domestic. The market was strong, but the founder couldn't ignore the flood of messages coming from abroad. Emails arrived from distributors in Asia, Europe, and South America, each one asking the same question: when will your device be available here? At first, the idea of international expansion felt overwhelming. The team was small, the budget was limited, and none of them had experience navigating foreign markets. But the founder knew that innovation could not remain in one corner of the world forever. If the invention had the potential to change the way people worked, it had to cross borders. The first step was research. The team spent weeks studying global markets, comparing regulations, and understanding cultural differences in how technology was used. They discovered something interesting. While the device was popular domestically for its speed and durability, potential customers abroad valued portability and energy efficiency even more. This insight became the foundation for an updated version tailored for international markets. The company's first target was a country in Southeast Asia, where internet adoption was growing rapidly and local entrepreneurs were eager for affordable, practical tech solutions. But entering a new market required more than simply shipping products overseas. Regulations were strict, and certification was mandatory before any electronics could be sold. This meant navigating a maze of paperwork, testing requirements, and compliance standards that seemed endless. At one point, a single missing document delayed the launch by nearly 2 months. The founder learned quickly that international business was as much about patience as it was about vision. When the shipment finally cleared customs, anticipation was high. The company partnered with a small local distributor who understood the market's nuances and could translate marketing materials into the local language. They launched quietly at first, targeting small business owners and independent creators. The reception exceeded expectations. Customers praised not only the functionality of the device, but also the fact that it was affordable compared to competitors. Word spread quickly, and orders began to increase. For the first time, the team saw sales graphs spike from regions thousands of miles away. Encouraged by this success, the founder set their sights on Europe. This was a more mature market with higher competition, but also a strong appetite for innovative products. Europe came with its own set of challenges: stricter safety regulations, higher marketing costs, and an expectation for premium customer service. To adapt, the company introduced a pro version of the device with enhanced features and a refined design that appealed to European buyers. They also invested in local customer support, hiring bilingual representatives to ensure that no language barrier could stand in the way of adoption. The gamble paid off. Within a year, the device was being used in over 15 countries. Each market taught the company something new, from the importance of localized branding to the need for different plug types and voltage compatibility. These details, often overlooked by newcomers, became critical to sustaining growth. However, expansion brought new pressures. Production had to scale rapidly to meet demand, and managing global logistics was far more complex than handling domestic deliveries. Delays at ports, sudden changes in tariffs, and fluctuations in currency exchange rates all tested the company's ability to adapt. Despite these hurdles, the founder believed that the challenges of going global were worth it. The invention was no longer a niche product born out of necessity. It was now part of an international conversation about accessible technology. The founder began to receive invitations to speak at conferences, where audiences wanted to hear how a small startup had managed to compete on a global stage. What started as a risky step into the unknown became the company's greatest strength. By embracing diversity in markets, customers, and ideas, the team built resilience. They learned that success was not about dominating a single market, but about creating something valuable enough to be welcomed anywhere in the world. As the year closed, the company's map of sales lit up with dots across multiple continents. The garage where the journey began felt like a distant memory. The dream had crossed borders, and in doing so, it had transformed into something far larger than the founder ever imagined. For years, the device had been celebrated as a symbol of innovation. a story of perseverance and ingenuity. But as the company grew, so did the scrutiny. The turning point came unexpectedly, sparked not by a technical flaw or a supply chain issue, but by a heated public conversation about the broader impact of technology on society. It began when a prominent journalist published a lengthy article questioning whether the device, and others like it, were doing more harm than good. The piece argued that while the invention was undeniably useful, it was also contributing to a growing dependency on technology, reshaping industries in ways that threatened jobs and disrupting traditional lifestyles. Within days, the story was picked up by other media outlets. Television debates, online videos, and social media threads amplified the discussion. Some praised the device for empowering users and creating new opportunities. Others condemned it as a symbol of reckless innovation, driven by profit rather than responsibility. For the founder, this was an entirely new kind of crisis. In the past, challenges had been concrete: broken parts, late shipments, faulty code. This was different. It was about perception, ethics, and public trust. And unlike a mechanical defect, there was no simple fix. Investors grew concerned. A sudden drop in the company's stock price reflected the uncertainty surrounding its reputation. Sales slowed in key markets, not because the device had changed, but because public opinion had. Potential customers hesitated, wondering if buying the product meant endorsing something controversial. In private meetings, the leadership team debated how to respond. Some argued that the company should stay silent, letting the debate burn out naturally. Others insisted they needed to defend the product, explaining its benefits and countering misinformation. The founder saw merit in both sides, but believed there was a third way: engage with the critics directly. The company organized an open forum inviting journalists, industry experts, customers, and even outspoken detractors to discuss the concerns. The founder took the stage, not to deliver a polished marketing speech, but to listen. Attendees shared stories, some uplifting, others troubling, about how the device had changed their lives. A teacher spoke of how it had revolutionized her classroom, making learning more accessible. A small business owner credited it with saving his company during a difficult year. But a union representative described how it had rendered certain jobs obsolete, leaving workers struggling to adapt. The founder acknowledged the criticism, agreeing that technology carried both benefits and risks. The key, they said, was not to stop innovating, but to innovate responsibly. That meant working with communities, offering retraining programs, and ensuring that the company's growth did not come at the cost of human dignity. This approach was risky. Some shareholders worried that acknowledging flaws would only fuel the controversy. But over time, the strategy began to pay off. The open dialogue earned the company a reputation for transparency and empathy. Media outlets began framing the founder not as a detached tech executive, but as a leader willing to confront the difficult questions. Still, the debate did not disappear. Certain groups remained critical, and online discussions continued to challenge the company's role in shaping the future. But now, the founder saw this as part of the responsibility that came with influence. The invention had grown beyond a product. It had become part of a global conversation about how technology and humanity should coexist. By the end of the year, sales had stabilized, and the company's public image had shifted from that of a disruptive newcomer to a thoughtful innovator. The founder knew that winning public trust was not a one-time achievement. It was an ongoing process, requiring constant awareness and willingness to adapt. The backlash had been intense, but it had also been clarifying. It forced the company to define its values, not just its business strategy. And in doing so, it set the stage for the final and most ambitious chapter of its story. One where the invention would leave the realm of consumer technology and step into a role that could shape the future of entire industries. Global expansion brought prestige, but it also brought a reality the team had not fully anticipated. Demand was beginning to outpace supply at a dangerous rate. The device, once assembled in modest batches at a single contracted facility, was now selling in volumes that strained every link in the production chain. For months, orders piled up faster than they could be fulfilled. The founder initially viewed this as a good problem to have, proof that the invention had captured the market's attention. But behind the scenes, the pressure was mounting. Customers in multiple countries were waiting weeks, sometimes months, for delivery. Retailers were frustrated. Distributors began to hint that if delays continued, they might switch to competitors. The problem reached its peak when the main manufacturing partner announced an unexpected halt in production. A key component supplier had failed to deliver a shipment on time, citing a shortage of raw materials. Without that part, the assembly line stopped entirely. The warehouse, once bustling, grew eerily quiet. The founder realized that the entire business was dangerously dependent on a fragile chain of suppliers. One disruption could ripple through the entire operation, costing millions in lost revenue and damaging the company's reputation. The first response was to negotiate with the current supplier, offering higher prices in exchange for faster delivery. But the shortage was global, and money alone could not fix it. The company began searching for alternative suppliers, only to discover that most required long lead times to ramp up production. Days turned into weeks. The crisis worsened. Online forums where customers discussed the device began to fill with complaints. Social media posts criticized the company for overpromising and under-delivering. For the founder, each negative comment felt like a personal blow. At an emergency meeting, the team brainstormed solutions. One idea was to redesign the device to use a more readily available component. This would require re-engineering part of the product, a risky move as it could affect performance and reliability. Another option was to partner with multiple smaller manufacturers across different countries, reducing the risk of a single point of failure. They decided to pursue both paths at once. Engineers worked long nights testing alternative designs, while the operations team scouted new manufacturing partners in regions less affected by the shortage. Negotiations were intense, often involving early morning video calls across time zones. In the meantime, the founder made a difficult but strategic decision: to be completely transparent with customers. Instead of hiding the delays, the company issued public updates explaining the situation and outlining the steps being taken to resolve it. This honesty, while risky, won back some goodwill. Customers appreciated knowing they were not being ignored. 3 months into the crisis, the first signs of recovery appeared. A redesigned version of the device passed internal quality tests, and new manufacturing contracts were signed with facilities in 2 different countries. Production resumed at a slower pace at first, but each week output increased. By the 6th month, the backlog of orders had been cleared, sales stabilized, and although the company had lost some customers to competitors, it retained its core market. The founder considered this a victory, not because everything had gone perfectly, but because the business had survived a test that could have ended it entirely. The crisis left lasting changes. The company adopted a diversified supply strategy, ensuring that no single component or partner could hold the business hostage again. Warehouses were reorganized, and forecasting systems were upgraded to predict demand more accurately. Looking back, the founder realized that this period, though painful, had forced the company to mature. The invention was no longer a fragile startup product. It had become an industrial-scale operation capable of withstanding shocks. The manufacturing crisis had nearly broken the business, but in the process, it forged resilience into its very foundation. As production ramped up to meet the next wave of global demand, the founder understood a truth that every enduring company learns. Growth is not just about making more. It is about building the strength to keep making no matter what. Years had passed since the rainy afternoon when frustration turned into curiosity and curiosity into invention. What began as a single repair on a small desk in a modest apartment had grown into something far greater than anyone could have imagined. The device, once broken and nearly discarded, had transformed into a global phenomenon, reshaping the way people communicated, worked, and connected with each other. The inventor now stood in a spacious, sunlit workspace. Shelves were lined with prototypes, old and new, each representing a step in the journey. On one wall hung photographs from across the world, images sent by people whose lives had been touched by the invention, teachers using it in classrooms, doctors employing it in rural clinics, entrepreneurs building their businesses with its help. The impact was undeniable. It was no longer just a product, it had become a symbol of possibility. The story was told in universities as an example of resourcefulness, in business seminars as proof that innovation could come from unexpected places, and in households as a reminder that broken things could be fixed, and sometimes made better than before. The inventor often thought back to the early days when the future seemed uncertain. The late nights of trial and error, the frustration of failures, and the exhilaration of small victories had all built the foundation for everything that followed. The journey had not been without sacrifices. Personal time, financial stability, and countless hours of work had been poured into the dream. But each challenge had carried its own lesson, shaping the person behind the invention as much as the invention itself. Over time, the company that grew from that single repair had expanded far beyond what the inventor could run alone. Teams of engineers, designers, and researchers now work together, building on the original idea and pushing it into new directions. Yet the heart of the project remained the same, solving real problems for real people. What stood out most was how the invention had inspired others. Young innovators, some with no formal training, reached out to share their own stories of fixing, modifying, and creating. Many had been motivated by the belief that if one person could change the world starting from a single broken device, then they could too. The inventor had received invitations to speak at conferences, appear in interviews, and advise new startups. Yet, despite the recognition, there was a quiet humility in every appearance. The message was always clear. The greatest breakthroughs often come from the simplest beginnings, and from a willingness to see opportunity where others see only failure. Now, standing in the workshop, the inventor picked up the original repaired device, the very one that had started it all. Its casing was scratched, its components outdated by modern standards, but it still powered on. The faint hum and familiar glow of the screen brought back memories of that first improbable victory. It was a reminder that the true legacy was not just in the technology itself, but in the mindset it had fostered. The willingness to open something up, to look inside, to believe that what is broken can be restored. That was the lasting gift. Around the world, the invention continued to evolve. New versions appeared each year, adapted for different industries, integrated with the latest advancements, and made more accessible than ever. The original idea had been stretched, improved, and transformed in ways the inventor could never have predicted. But every iteration carried a piece of that first moment of discovery. As the day drew to a close, sunlight faded into a warm glow over the city skyline. The inventor placed the original device back on its shelf and paused for a moment, reflecting. The journey from frustration to global impact had been long, unpredictable, and full of challenges. But it had also been deeply rewarding. The legacy was more than the product. It was a movement, a shift in thinking, a quiet revolution that proved the extraordinary potential of ordinary people. And it all began with something broken, a willingness to try, and the belief that even small actions can spark changes that reach the entire world.